There are errors in the Bible and mistakes in the Bible other than spelling and grammar. I know you're all really disappointed, right? So there are errors in the Bible other than spelling and grammar, right? Because we've talked before about how there's all these errors in the manuscripts of the Bible, but a lot of them are little spelling things, a little nothing. Are there actual errors, like factual things that are wrong in the Bible? I'm going to, what's that? Strongly disagree. You know, what's interesting is I'm going to mildly agree, right? That there are some things in your English translation that you have that maybe wasn't in the original, right? But most of those things we know. If you look in your Bible and you're reading along and there's a footnote, and you look down and it'll tell you that, you know, these manuscripts don't have this passage, these manuscripts do.
It's not a mistake in the accounting.
Right. So that's not an error, right? It's like, hey, by the way, we're not exactly sure what this one right here said. That's not really an error. Well, he's going to try to claim that there are some actual factual mistakes. So let's see what he gives.
Number 9, there are errors and mistakes in the Bible other than spelling and grammar. Now, this is, I think Christians are going to be all over the map on this one. There are going to be some Christians who say, no, besides spelling and grammar, no, I strongly disagree. There's no errors, no mistakes in the Bible. And others that say, well, sure, there's mistakes in the Bible, but that doesn't change my faith. It doesn't change my beliefs. Let me give you an example. I didn't put where this is found. I think this is in Marc. I'll put it in the chat later. But Jesus heals a deaf and mute man. Then Jesus left the vicinity of Tyre and went through Sidon down to the Sea of Galilee into the region of Decapolis. Now, is this an error? Whoever wrote this, did they know the geography at the time? So if Jesus is starting here and his destination is Decapolis, 10 cities in this area over here, would he go up to Sidon? Like, did he have to pick up some dry cleaning and then come down? Now, I realize this is very easy. Well, Jesus maybe had something else to do in Sidon, and so and he just didn't say what it was. So I'll grant you that. And again, this is what I brought up with the expansion of the narrative of the tomb story, how it goes from the red in Mark all the way to that. Now, are these errors? Of course not. You can harmonize this. In fact, if you go on Answers in Genesis, I think they even have like flow charts and animations on how they can make everything fit. But it is like, if you're a reasonable Christian who's just like, at some point, it's like trying to fit a square into a circle hole. Are there errors in the Bible? Jesus, this is, again, I didn't put the reference. It is, this is Mark 2 and Matthew 6. Jesus was asked about fasting. Now, if you're a Christian and believe that these are the very words of Jesus that he spoke, Jesus answered, "How can guests of the bridegroom fast while he is with him? They cannot, so long as they have him with them." So Jesus is basically saying to his disciples, or saying to the people who are asking about his disciples, no, my disciples are not going to fast while I'm here. But then in Matthew 6, Jesus says, he's speaking to his disciples. This is the context in this passage. To his disciples, he says, when you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do. So in Mark, he's saying, no, my disciples don't fast. And then in Matthew, he's saying, when speaking to the disciples, saying, when you fast. And this is like right next to like when you pray, when you do other things. This is not like after I'm gone. This is my one and only Wikipedia, but it's sourced in other places. But when was Jesus born? Was it 6 CE at the time of the census, or was it 4 BC, the time of Herod the Great, just before he died? Most scholars think that the author of this gospel made a mistake. Oh, yes, this is a good one that most scholars say this is just a flat-out error. John 19, the question is, what time of day did the crucifixion of Jesus start? And in John 19, it is around noon or just after noon. And in Mark, it was 9 in the morning when they crucified him. This is a problem. If you are that type of Christian who says, no, this is all inspired and perfect, and no, scholars say, no, this is a mistake, and it can't be both after 12 and at 9. And there's other errors, like the guard story in Matthew. Most scholars think that that's not history. It was put in error. This is not reflecting what actually happened. And if you think I'm lying to you here, that most scholars say this, for some of you respect William Lane Craig, so I'll let him say it for me.
Most scholars don't accept the historicity of the guard story.
There you go. In fact, most scholars don't accept the historicity of a lot of stories in the New Testament. For example, the withering of the fig tree and so forth.
I love that he brought this one up because we've talked about this one. Where in, I think it was in Marc, where Jesus goes north to go south. Where it says, then Jesus left the vicinity of Tyre and went through Sidon, down to the Sea of Galilee into the region of Decapolis. Right? We've talked about this before, that there, I don't know if you can see up in the corner there, from Tyre, he goes up to Sidon, then he goes down to the Sea of Galilee. And skeptics have said, obviously Mark had no idea about Galilee because Jesus should have just gone straight across. Right? And he's pointing out, this is an error. See right here, it shows that Mark did not know anything about the geography. Y'all remember this one we've talked about before? Well, what's the issue? Right? Yeah, terrain. There's a big old mountain in the way. So if you wanted to go, you're going to have to climb. It's actually easier to go north and go around it. So is that an error? No, it's not an error. Actually, it's showing his error, that he doesn't know what he was talking about, and Mark actually did. He mentions, again, the tomb story. Right? It's like, remember I showed you this tomb story where there's all these differences in the account of the empty tomb. But did you catch what he actually said? He admits they're not errors. He said, well, there's ways, of course you can harmonize it and kind of make a, way that these don't contradict each other. Well, okay. Then we're done. There's no error. Period. Move it along. But he's not going to drop it there. Right? He says, but really, when you have to work that hard to make it fit, it's not a lot of hard work. It really isn't. But he says that it's like putting a square peg in a round hole. Well, actually, no, it's not a square peg in a round hole, because we're told we've got a round peg in a round hole, because it fits. There is no error, and he himself admitted it. Fasting. In Mark 2, Jesus says, how can the guests of the bridegroom fast while he is with them? They cannot, so long as they have him with them. But over in Matthew 6, Jesus says, when you fast, don't do like the Pharisees do, blah, blah, blah. So what is it? Is Jesus saying his disciples don't fast? Or is he telling his disciples to fast? And I find this really interesting because he doesn't even do his homework, because in his own quotation, it says, the time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them, and on that day they will fast. No error, no contradiction. He's saying, right now they don't fast because I'm with them. Why would they fast? But the day's coming when I will leave. And hey guys, when I leave, here's how you fast. There's no contradiction at all. And he even, it's right there in his own thing. All right. Birth of Jesus. Yeah, I think we got time for this. Okay. I don't know if you are aware, but in Luke gives some very specific historical measurements about when things happened. And he says that Jesus was born during the reign of Herod the Great. And then he refers to a census, right? Because remember, they had to go to Bethlehem because of the census that was taken during while Quirinius was governor of Syria. Well, the only problem is, according to historical documents, Quirinius was not governor of Syria during the reign of Herod the Great. And so that appears to be a little bit of a problem. It looked to be a contradiction.
Supposed biblical error. The census of Quirinius mentioned by Luke. Luke chapter 2 begins with, "In those days a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration when Quirinius was governor of Syria. And all went to be registered, each to his own town. And Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the town of Nazareth, to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be registered with Mary, his betrothed, who was with child." Skeptics will usually assert 4 problems. 1. In a Roman census, Joseph would not have to travel to Bethlehem, but could register at his current residency. Mary would not have to register at all. 2. No Roman census would have been conducted in Judea while Herod the Great ruled until 4 BC. 3. There was never a single census conducted of the entire Roman Empire. It was done in sections. And 4. Quirinius was not governor until 6 AD. Jesus was born under Herod the Great, so this could not be the census Quirinius conducted in 6 to 7 AD. So how do we resolve these issues? Well, the first issue is incorrect, because we do have historical data people had to travel to their place of origin for a census. A papyrus which dates to 104 AD states that the prefect of Egypt ordered Egyptians to return to their place of origin so the census could be carried out. Plus, it was more likely Jews would need to be in their place of origin for a census, since Jewish law stated their property was the property of their fathers. Harold Honer says, "The Romans would comply to the custom of laying claim to one's family estate in order to assess it for taxation. Every person needed to appear to be questioned so as to make a proper assessment of his property. So it is likely Joseph would need to be in his place of origin for property assessment. It would also be logical that Mary would have gone with Joseph, since rumors appeared to have existed of how she became pregnant, and since the marriage had not been consummated yet, it is likely Joseph would have wanted her close by for protection from insults and shaming." The second supposed error assumes Augustus would not have conducted censuses in vassal kingdoms like that of Herod the Great. But there is also historical data to challenge this. Josephus tells us around 7 BC Herod fell out of favor with Augustus and was treated more like a subject than a friend. This means Herod's autonomy would have been taken away. Add that to the fact that Herod was getting old and his sons would fight for future rule of the area. So it would have been a perfect time to assess that region before Herod died to prepare for the future of the area. Josephus also tells us the people of Herod's domain swore allegiance to Herod and Augustus, which leads us to the conclusion Rome had a greater involvement in Herod's kingdom, and it was not so autonomous. The third issue can be resolved by looking at what Luke actually says. Honer says, Luke uses the present tense, indicating that Augustus ordered censuses to be taken regularly, rather than only one time. Thus it is reasonable to believe that there was an order of a general census in the time of Augustus. Sir William Ramsay said, "The decree of Augustus, which Luke mentions, is commonly interpreted as ordering that a single census should be held of the whole Roman world. That is not a correct interpretation of Luke's words. He uses the present tense, and he means that Augustus ordered enrollments to be regularly taken, according to the strict and proper usage of the present tense." The final issue has 2 plausible explanations. The first is that the census was started during Herod the Great, but was not completed and finalized until Quirinius. Scholar Darrell Bach explains it like this.
Augustus got organized to take this census. This census took place somewhere between 6 and 4 BC, or at least the beginning mechanizations of it. But it wasn't actually executed until we got to Quirinius. In other words, he's the one who took the data, put it together, presented it for Rome, and Rome actually began to make use of it for taxation under Quirinius. So this is a long process. I like to make the analogy of when they build a major freeway in a city. Sometimes it takes a while between the planning of the freeway and the actual building of the freeway and the completion of the freeway. There's a freeway here in Dallas, Central Expressway. It was 30 years from the planning to the completion of the exercise. My own take is that this census became associated with Quirinius because he's the one who completed it, but he wasn't the one who was responsible for starting it.
This would be consistent with what Josephus tells us about Herod Archelaus, who was reigning before Quirinius. Josephus tells us Archelaus turned Judea into a mess while he was reigning. He was disposed of by the Roman Empire, and Quirinius was brought in to fix a lot of the problems he created. The second explanation is to look at the words Luke uses and make an inference. The actual word Luke uses we translate as governor is hegemon, which is used to refer to a wide range of Roman official positions, and not necessarily governor. He also says it was the first census under Quirinius, which implies there were more after this one, and Luke even mentions the one in 6 AD in Acts 5. So it is possible Luke was not talking about the census of 6 AD, but one prior to that, possibly when he was acting as procurator under Varus or Saturninus. Thus, Luke's statement doesn't contradict our historical knowledge of the Roman world at that time. Tertullian even noted in his time the imperial records recorded that censuses were being conducted in Judea around the time of Varus or Saturninus. Of course, it is not proven, since we lack extensive data of the life of Quirinius. But the point is there is no direct evidence Luke contradicted other historical data. It could have been that the census was started, but not completed and finalized until Quirinius. Or there could just have been a less well-known census in that area, which Quirinius was procurator of. William Ramsay also provided an extensive account that Quirinius was most likely in the region during the time of Christ's birth. Therefore, this supposed biblical error can be resolved.
One thing that you will find is that often the challenges are actually based on things that aren't as certain as skeptics seem to like to present them as. So in that case, we have a census that we know about that Quirinius did. And so, but you can't then definitively say it could not have been in the time of Herod the Great. This must be a contradiction. The video just gave several explanations, possibilities. Again, we don't have for sure, set in stone, we know this happened. But we have plenty of explanations that show that it doesn't have to be a contradiction. Contradiction is a very specific kind of thing. And if you don't actually have the evidence to say it was a contradiction, then it's not an error. There's no reason to think that it was. All right. How are we on time? Okay. I think this is kind of the last one. We're just going, aha, look at this error. And so let's look at this error. In John 19, this is the crucifixion of Jesus. It says, it was the day of preparation of the Passover. It was about noon. And so then Christ was crucified. Now in Mark 15, verse 25, it says, it was 9 in the morning when they crucified Christ. Well, that's a bit of a pickle. When was Jesus crucified? Was it noon or somewhere abouts? Or was it 9 o'clock in the morning? That's quite a bit of a difference, right? Well, there actually have been several explanations offered for how this apparent contradiction, and I mean, it does look straight out contradiction. By the way, let me just point out, here he uses the New International Version. Now, NIV is not a terrible Bible translation, but they do take some liberties with explaining things rather than just translating them. Because in the original text, in the Greek manuscript, it does not say at about noon. It says around the 6th hour. And in Mark, it does not say at 9 in the morning. It says at the 3rd hour. Well, what does that mean? Right? You actually have to know what their time measurement is and what they're referring to when they say the 3rd hour or the 6th hour. 3rd or 6th hour starting from when? Right? And so notice again, he selects the Bible translation that best fits his purposes. So let's look at some of these possible explanations. Some scholars have said, well, you know what? It looks like John is actually using the Roman timekeeping. See, because part of the thing is that Jews start their day from, their hour keeping from sunup. So if the sun rises about 6 o'clock, then the 3rd hour of the day would be 9 o'clock. And the 6th hour of the day would be about noon. Okay, if it's the Jewish time. Now, if it's the Roman system, the Romans actually had, I think, a couple different ones. They either measured from midnight to midnight or noon to noon. Well, if that's the case, well, that's a whole different time system, what it's referring to. So some scholars have said that, and they have their arguments for that. Others have said that time back then is not a precise measurement. They had sundials, but even that was dependent on the time of year, the location, different things like that. And they didn't have precise time. So they may have used phrases like, the 3rd hour just kind of refers to midday. Right? And the 6th hour would just kind of refer to, or mid-morning, and that would refer to midday. Well, there's actually a little bit of overlap between mid-morning and midday where, you could use either one to refer to the same time. So some have tried to say maybe that's the case. Some say that Mark is referring to the process, right? He's not talking about just the exact time that Jesus was nailed to the cross. It's whenever they started the beatings and the carrying the cross down the road and everything. He's saying all of that started 9 o'clock in the morning, in which case several hours later at noon is when it, actually came to fruition and they put him on the cross. St. Augustine actually favored this. This is what he argued for, was that Mark was just actually describing that they crucified Jesus, meaning the whole ordeal. I kind of like this one. I'm not going to die on this hill, but I like this explanation. That there was an early copy error in John. That our Bibles, when it says the 9th hour, it actually, or when it says the 6th hour, it actually originally said the 3rd hour. There's actually quite a few early church fathers who held this idea. And if you, in the Greek, I'm not a Greek scholar, but I've looked into some of this in preparing for this lesson. The letters, the Greek symbols for 3rd and for 6th, kind of similar. So it'd be easy to see how somebody could mistake it and copy it wrong. I wasn't able to provide a picture of that, but I find this very interesting. Peter of Alexandria, he was the bishop in Alexandria, and he says, talking about the crucifixion of Jesus, now it was the preparation about the 3rd hour, as the accurate books have it, and the autograph copy itself of the evangelist John, which up to this day has by divine grace been preserved in the most holy church of Ephesus and is there adored by the faithful. So you have this guy who's saying the original copy, or the original that John himself wrote, is in Ephesus at the time that this man is alive, and he's saying it says 3rd hour. I mean, that's not a slam dunk. He could be wrong, but you've got a guy who was within, the time first, I forget exactly the date he was around, but the early time of the church, saying the book of John, the original book of John, is still there, and it says 3rd hour. That seems pretty good explanation to me. I'm satisfied with that. Now, again, not a slam dunk. Doesn't mean it's a for sure thing, but again, whenever someone's saying that's an error, well, maybe not. Here, look, we have these other explanations that says it's not an error. And lastly, we didn't play the video, so you didn't get to hear this. I love this. Taking little bits out of context. He mentions the guards from the tomb. Remember, they put some guards at the tomb. There's an earthquake. Angel shows up. The guards freak out and run away. And they go and tell the Jews, and the Jews say, well, just say that his disciples stole the body. We'll cover for you, right? That you fell asleep and the disciples stole the body. And he makes the point and says, most scholars believe that the whole guard story is just made up. It's just a legend that Christians stuck in there to help support the idea of the resurrection. And he plays William Lane Craig, who's probably one of the leading Christian teacher, philosopher, apologists out there right now. One of the most in-demand Christian speakers on the planet right now. And he plays a little clip of William Lane Craig saying, most scholars think that the guard story was made up. And that's it. He just plays that little clip. What's funny is if you actually go to the video, it's only about 3 minutes long. He goes into a little more detail why he kind of thinks maybe it's not made up. And that really, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether it was made up or not, because the fact that it needs to be there helps defend the resurrection story, the fact that the tomb was empty at all. And so, but I thought, okay, he's going to use this man to try to back up his claim. So let's go see what William Lane Craig has to say about the guard story. And he had quite a bit to say about it. I found an article that he wrote online that is pages and pages long about why the guard story actually is historical. So it's funny because he's playing a clip by a man who says most historians think it's not true. But here's why they're wrong. And he goes into a whole article about why they're wrong. And I'm not going to run into that because we're about out of time anyway. But there's several. I mean, he goes through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about almost a dozen. This is what they claim. Here's why it's wrong. This is why they think this. Here's why they're wrong. This is what they say. Here's why they're wrong. Over and over and over again. So it's kind of funny that he picks a quote from a man who then, in another work, actually turns around and disproves what he's trying to say. But what's interesting is, and we didn't watch the video, so you didn't get to hear it. He says, the guards, that Matthew says the guards were there. Well, most scholars don't think that the guard story is true. That's it. That's all he says. Right? We've talked about logical fallacies, errors in thinking. This is called appeal to authority, or possibly appeal to popularity. Most scholars say so. Okay, that doesn't mean it's true, right? You can't just say because the smart people said so. That's not an argument. That's not actual defense of a claim. And so, again, he offers no reason to think that it is indeed an error. And so, and that would have been the end of that. That's right where he leaves off there. So, once again, it's no trouble at all. We're not causing any trouble. None of this is making you go, oh no, I can't trust the Bible, because it doesn't stand up to scrutiny.